If you sculpt glass with torches like I do and you want to make things on mandrels, it's really good to know how to coat your mandrels and how to remove the beads or whatever you sculpt from them when you're done annealing them in the kiln. I have steel mandrels, steel welding rods that are cut down. These are 3/32 of an inch. I hold 7 of them at a time. Let me take out 2. I'll hold 5 of them at a time, and I fan them out between my fingers so that they are not touching each other. And I press my thumb against my other fingers with these mandrels in between to sandwich them in place so they don't roll around. I shook this right before I opened it a moment ago, and depending on how much kiln wash is in your jar, you can hold it vertically, or if there's less in there, you can hold it more at an angle so that you can coat the mandrels higher up along the length of the mandrel. Then I take the cap and I tap the excess off. And I should have the torch on, and then I would flame dry these in the torch. Let me do that now. Of course. I hold them high up because if you heat them too quickly and the water that's in the kiln wash boils, it'll make bubbles and bare spots on the mandrels where they've just been coated. Usually I will do a batch and leave it like, okay, so I let this dry by moving all of the mandrels in and out of the top of the flame, just coaxing the moisture out of the kiln wash so that they dry. And you don't have to see, as it dries, the color is getting lighter. You can see there's some lighter patches and some darker patches on the kiln wash. As the water is evaporating from the kiln wash, I don't need to dry them entirely in the torch flame. I can just get most of the moisture out, still some light patches, but most of it has dried, and I'll set them down to cool and do another batch so that those can cool while I go back and coat the first batch in a second layer. This makes it easier to make long beads that are covering more of the surface of the mandrel that can then be removed. I used to not make long beads because I didn't know how to remove them from the mandrels, and then I learned that you can just coat the mandrels 2 or 3 times even, and this will make it easier to take them off when you're done working. So now I take another batch of 5 mandrels, and my thumb is pressing them in place against my fingers with a distance between these so that each mandrel tip can get evenly coated with kiln wash, and they have enough space to not stick to each other, but there is enough space to also get them into the mouth of the kiln wash bottle. I dip them into the kiln wash once, and now I'm going to tap the excess off on the cap. I will coax the water out of them here high up in the flame on my torch. I use Glass Torch Technologies Bobcat, and I've had this for 23 years. I like it. I still like it. And you can see that some parts of this are, maybe you can see some parts of this kiln wash are still shiny, and so I'm just gradually heating them, not too quickly, never holding them still, always keeping them moving so that the heat is kissing all of them, and just gently. Okay. There's still some moisture there at the bottom, but those are dry enough for me to carefully set down. And as long as they're mostly dry, it's okay for them to touch when I set them down, as long as nothing is so wet that it's shiny and might stick to its neighbor if they happen to come into contact with each other. Now I'm going to close this and get this out of the way, and I'm going to get this ready. Here I have a coffee can that has some sand in it. Hey. And I will put this over here in front of my other coffee can that's full of sand. Here I have an old jar of kiln wash where the kiln wash is much more diluted, and it's not as thick and creamy as the other solution, which wasn't extremely thick and creamy. If you apply your kiln wash too thick, it's likelier to flake off while you're working, which can ruin whatever it is that you're working on. So that was a, you know, it would leave an opaque coating on the mandrel, but it wasn't like a pancake batter consistency, not that thick. And then the next one is much thinner. I don't know if you can see how it's not even opaquely coating the mouth of the jar after having shaken it. And this jar is way less full, so I hold it at an angle to try to coat higher up on the mandrel. Now those mandrels that I coated the first time are cooler, so that when I dip them into this jar of kiln wash, it does not sizzle or hiss. If your mandrels are sizzling or hissing on the second coating, it's still too hot. So I dip them in, I tap the excess liquid back into the cap, trying to keep them apart, not always succeeding. When I pull them apart, I try to do it slowly so that there's just a thin bridge connecting them, and then I will tap it again to try to smooth out that bump from the connection. Now I'm going to do the same thing here, high up in the flame, and wave them around a bit. I'm not trying to heat them so fast that I get air bubbles, but there might be some over here on this one. I will keep drying them and then I will show you what that looks like. Okay, so got most of the liquid out of these, but on this one in particular you can see some inconsistencies in the surface where there are, where's the focal distance? Air bubbles. And so I'm going to dip that one more time. Here I'm just tapping the excess back into the jar, and I didn't get it coated all the way up, but you can see the difference maybe where there are some, maybe not. Focus on my finger, and here is the mandrel. Some spots, and then where it's coated, those spots have been filled in. I'm going to bounce this in and out of the heat just a little bit. This is my other set of mandrels, which I just coated with the thinner kiln wash for the second coating. And I really have found that these twice coated mandrels make it a breeze to get the beads off the mandrels, which is especially difficult when making a lot of small beads like spacer beads, or a lot of small shapes to build larger forms, you know, constructing bigger pieces from many small components. I still sometimes get blisters on my fingers just from removing beads because I'll make so many and take off so many, but coating the mandrels twice with these two different consistencies of kiln wash makes all of the work so much easier. And now here's the can of sand, and the reason that I have that is because I'm going to take my mandrels that I have coated and I stand them up in this instead of drilling holes in a block of wood or other methods that I was told. This is easy and very adaptable.